But I was completely obsessed with baseball. I played on the team. I wasn't a great player, but I was good enough. I played on the team. I went to as many games as I could. I read stacks of books. I collected baseball cards. I listened to the radio, listened to the games, but also the stupid talk shows about baseball.
That was scholar and baseball lover Lincoln Mitchell. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. Every week on this podcast, you'll get to know academics, small business owners, bartenders, and San Franciscans from all walks of life, as they tell stories, share personal histories, and try to put into words what makes this city so special. Lincoln was born in New York City, but spent his early life in San Francisco after his family moved west. In this podcast, he talks about what the city was like back in the 70s, some schools he went to, the differences and similarities between New York and San Francisco, and the genesis of his love of baseball. Also, as our show Love Letters to the City draws to a close, we wanted you to know that we're having a closing party at 63 Bluxom Street Gallery this Friday, February 14th from 6 to 8. The event is free, and there will be art, music, a letter writing station, and beer and wine. Here's Lincoln.
I was born in New York City. I am kind of a cultural and ethnic stereotype of a New York Jew. I say that with a fair amount of pride, as all New York Jews, including Harvey Milk did. But, my family was in New York because that's where the boat stopped, and they were happy to be there. And but we moved out here in 71, frankly, as my parents' marriage was dissolving. So I was almost 4 years old. And, I continued to go back to New York at least once a year to visit my grandparents and my aunt and uncle and my cousins back there. But San Francisco was always home. And I've lived in New York since 1990, but San Francisco is the place I think of as the place where I was a kid, where I grew up, and all of that.
Formative,
yeah. And New York and San Francisco are both very similar. I think they're more similar than they are to any other American city, but they're also very different. And I always say that I spent my first half of my life having my friends out here saying, "Dude, mellow out," and then I got to graduate school, and all my friends said, "How come nothing ever stresses you out?" Right? So the best of Lincoln is that I draw on both of those equally to form my character. I guess the worst of me is that I'm stressed out and, all that kind of New York stuff. But
I feel like the comparisons of the two has been a common thread
for
me in my 20 years. Can you expound more on ways that you, in your mind, that you think that they're similar and ways that you think they're different?
The ways that they are similar is that they're both distinctly cosmopolitan urban places. They are both very diverse. They both have a vibrant kind of cultural and political life. They both are, today, important global cities. They both play an important role in American history. They're both cities where you can walk around and see people. I mean, New York's a better walking city because of the hills, but compared to LA or Washington or Philly or something, this is a real walking city too. So they just have a real urban feel like I don't think of any other city on the West Coast really does. And others on the East Coast do, but not quite as much. To me, the differences are, there's a few. The biggest difference, as I see it, is that people in San Francisco, despite of everything with the tech and all the new money and everything like that, they don't worship at the altar of professional accomplishment. Being busy, not sleeping enough, not seeing your kids if you have children, is not a status symbol here in the middle class the way it is there. And it really is there. And it's one of the reasons why it's tough. This is going to be controversial, but New York is a much better place to be Jewish. And not just because of the food. Although House of Bagels, there's one, my mother's the longest continuous customer at House of Bagels. They opened in 71, the year we moved here.
And Miller's closed on Polk.
We never went there.
Okay.
We went to House of Bagels. She went to Swan Oyster Depot to get occasionally, and when she would order in advance smoked salmon and things like that, they would always give her a little extra, and she couldn't figure out why. And then someone told her that they thought that she was picking up for the Mitchell brothers, because our last name is Mitchell. We are not related. But she would say, big order for Mitchell. My grandparents would be coming to town or something, and it would in fact be for her.
Perks. With the name.
Growing up here in the 70s and having a brother and having our last name, which we didn't have until 78. We changed our name, my brother and I. That's a longer story.
It's a different podcast.
But, it was you got the jokes all the time and the occasional request for tickets. But I think New York is a better place to be Jewish. There was, and this was certainly true in the time period I'm writing about, there was a kind of an accepted level of anti-Semitism here that often was so kind of accepted you didn't notice it. You know, and I mean, just to give you one example, you know, I wrote this book about 1978, and on November 27th, 1978, a politician, a right-wing politician who had campaigned using the phrase eradicate malignancies that blight our cities, less than 30 years he campaigned, 32 years after the liberation of the camps, shot the most visible and outspoken Jewish politician in the city, and no one here has ever written about it in that context, right? Because we just don't see it here. I just came across doing an article for research for another book, an article by a very prominent California historian using the most not very coded anti-Semitism. It was just mind-boggling. You wouldn't have done that in New York in 1975. So that is, you know, that is a difference. But it's not like you're out here, you know, it's not unlivable or terrible. It's just different. It's more like America in that way. Right. But so those are, you know, and I think it is also true that all these ideas, it is true that all these ideas that start out as crazy in San Francisco 10 years later are kind of the standard, right? So things like maybe we shouldn't just get all our coffee from a can, you know, which in the 70s people thought that was crazy, right? Maybe we should squeeze juice rather than get this really crappy frozen stuff. Maybe we should, on a more serious note, maybe we shouldn't just let the cops beat up gay people, you know? So this is a more progressive place. New York is a really provincial place that is 20 years behind the West Coast, even today. I mean, ideas that, I mean, I'll give you an example. In 1991, I had just moved to New York, and it was election day. And New York had expanded the city council from 35 to 51 people. And the reason was, similarly to our switch to district elections here in 77, to elect more diverse people. And it was big headline news that Tom Duane was elected to the city council in New York, who was the first out gay man person elected to the city council. And I remember reading that headline saying, my God, how could this take this long here? But they were really proud of themselves because New Yorkers on principle don't know anything that happens outside New York. So that's a little bit of how I see the contrast.
Did you talk about your family in detail, about your family uprooting and what brought them out here?
Well, what brought them out here was that my father, who recently died, but his life and career were kind of coming apart, and he had an opportunity to get a job out here. And he, you know, took that opportunity, and my mother, I mean, it seems to me at that point the marriage was clearly falling apart, and they were divorced in like a year of moving out here. That she
they both moved. They both came.
Yeah.
The whole family moved.
Yeah, me and my brother, and so she decided to come here, and more interestingly, the most interesting part of this story on a human level is that she stayed here. After they got divorced, she was a single mother with no support system. My grandparents were back in New York. Her sister was back in New York. My grandparents would have been able to have helped her in any way, and they did, but they would have helped her much more if she were in the same city, but she stayed here. She wanted that distance from the East Coast, from that world that a lot of people did here in the 70s, and she was really, as an adult, I was a kid, but she was part of that migration of people from the East Coast at that period who really had and some were gay, some were straight, some were hippies, some were not, who really had a role in remaking the city and transforming it from, I mean, the story I always tell is that in 1964, the Republican Party held their convention in the Cow Palace. Barry Goldwater, you know, was nominated for president. And at that time, San Francisco was seen as a normal American city that was, you know, more beautiful and with better food, which is still true. The second part of that, not the first part. In 1984, the Democratic Party held their convention at the Moscone Center, where Walter Mondale, you know, was nominated and went on to lose badly in the general election. And one of the many kind of bullet points in the post-mortem on Mondale's defeat was that, well, you can't hold a Democratic convention in San Francisco. It's way too far left and too crazy. And that was a 20-year period. It's a radical fast shift, if you think about it. And people coming here from other places and remaking the city were a huge part of that. And I was a part of them as a child, but that was, you know, you knew which side you were on, and I was on that side. And many of my friends and parents were not. Mm-hmm. And you really saw that in ways that maybe took a while to kind of figure out and unpack. You had to grow up a little bit to realize what was going on, but you definitely saw that.
It was more of a Catholic city back in.
Yeah, I mean, like most American cities.
Yeah.
And through this was heavily Italian, right? In 1975, 3 of the top 5 candidates for mayor, including the 2 in the runoff, were all Italian American, right? It was Italian, it was Irish, and that's who, you know, ran. There was a kind of overlay of you know, white Protestants and German Jews in the kind of people who ran the city. But it was, and that looked like a lot of cities in that regard. But it really began to change. It was also much more African American, for reasons we all know, and less Latino and Asian.
Right.
As late as I think I'm going to get the date slightly wrong. It was late 1960. It was 85% or so were non-Latino white here. That's a lot.
So it must have been about 72, 73 that you came out here?
Like 71. All of 71.
Sorry, my math is not good today. But you were almost, you said almost 4?
Yeah.
That's really, really young. Do you have any kind of first impressions for yourself?
No, I don't. Well, very vague ones. My brother, who was 2 years older than me, I remember him, like, he was amazed how clean the streets were. Now, part of this, at New York, today you wouldn't have that experience, right?
Almost flip-flop.
It's almost flip-flop. I mean, today, when I'm here now, like, my friends and my mother are, like, always telling me don't leave stuff in the car, and you do that in New York. I mean, you know, you leave your Easy Pass there, and no one's going to break in and take it. You know, here you really, but that was his impression. I think my impression was it just felt brighter and looked differently, but that's a really vague impression from a child.
Yeah, really young.
Yeah.
So what were some of your earliest memories?
Here?
Yes.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of personal, like my family stuff, but I just remember being at a lot of kind of outdoor, this is, again, I'm young, outdoor events, not like, you know, concerts in the park kind of thing, but, you know, Ghirardelli Square or events at things Golden, like for kids, where there were, you know, like drawing and tie-dyeing, but it was definitely, even by then, you know, the person working with the kids was a hippie, you know what I mean? And that was different than I think the rest of the country, which is all I knew. Right. So a lot of memories of that. And then starting school.
Please name drop schools.
Yeah, name drop schools.
Yes.
So I went to Stewart Hall for boys from pre-kindergarten through 8th grade. I only went to 8th grade at that time. I like to think of myself, again, I have no proof, but I say I'm the second most famous Jewish alumni of that complex of schools. The most famous is Dianne Feinstein. But that put me in a very interesting world. And one, you know, it was, my grandfather was completely shocked that we were going to Catholic school and took a while for him to process that. It was a great school in many respects. And I had a great education and a very good experience there, but a very different world. I mean, these were, for the most part, either, because it's a Catholic school, but it's not a, again, I'm not a Catholic, it's not a parish school. Mm-hmm. So it's not connected to, you know, it's not like you're at, I don't know, 10th and Fulton and everything within 10 blocks goes there, right? It's almost more of a magnet Catholic school.
Okay. Who were the teachers?
The teachers, well, they weren't all nuns.
Okay.
Some of them were. There was Sister Schroeder was a nun. Norm Luna was the social studies teacher. Cornelius Church was the math techer. I can go through this.
Those are great names,
At one point,
too.
The head of the school ran away with the nun who ran the girls' school. That was a big scandal. That was fun. I was too young to really, but everyone knew it was funny. And it was, you know, the Pelosi's, the daughters of Nancy Pelosi went to school there. Nancy Pelosi was always an active parent in my recollection. I didn't, you know, not like we were chatting about politics in 1975, but, you know, she was around.
When you were like
exactly.
eight
I mean, although I grew up in a very political family, so if anyone would have been, it was me. But it was, I remember in 76, I was one of the very, very few kids in my class who were supporting Carter over Ford. Just to give you a sense of perspective, my first political memory of that school is coming home from school in what would have been the fall of 75, and with my brother, and talking to my mother about this guy with this funny name, Barba Gelata, who was going to be the mayor. And my mother said, yes, that's a funny name, and we're supporting the other guy. The other guy was George Moscone. But that tells you, in this very divisive election, the chatter at Stewart Hall was all with the conservative, racist Republican, not, you know, the progressive Democrat. Today, that would be totally different, even at Stewart Hall.
And you said that was K through 8. Yeah.
Yes.
Any other memories from Stewart Hall?
Well, I have hours of memories, and you know, just to put this in perspective, we're sitting here Friday afternoon, as you know, but tonight I have a flight tomorrow. Tonight I'm going out to dinner with 3 guys who are friends since Stewart Hall, who started with me in kindergarten, 1st, and 3rd grade, respectively. There'll be a couple other guys too, but so in you know, and for a lot of reasons. One of which I think I was just I think when you know, when you talk to people of my generation, you use the shorthand. It was the 70s, it was a divorce. Everyone knows what that means, right? And it was not a good one. I mean, not that never really a good one, but it was a bad one. And when you go through that, in some respects, the healthiest way you can respond, and I'm saying this a little bit subjectively, is to distance yourself and build relationships outside of the family, because it was just so difficult. So I was always able and fortunate enough that I had some good people around me at school to build friendships. And the school itself was extremely supportive and extremely zero tolerance for any kind of anti-Semitism. I mean, that was the one place, you never would have heard a word from any of the teachers or any of the nuns. If a kid said something, they got in trouble. I mean, they were really good about that. My mother used to come in every year, this is true, it's all true, and tell the kids, like K through 5, so the little kids, the story of Hanukkah during Hanukkah season, and give out dreidels. She would go into like some Judaica store and buy like 200 dreidels. They were probably a penny each or something. And she would give them away. And I remember about 15 years ago, I was at a friend of mine's house who was, I think he was at his mom's place in the East Bay helping her, like move a piece of furniture, something that required a younger man rather than an older woman to do it. And we stopped in his childhood bedroom and there was a dreidel on his, he's not Jewish, on his dresser. And I said, "What's this dreidel doing?" He said, "Your mother gave that to me." So it was a great experience. It's actually, I'm a secular left-wing Jew, and I have this kind of odd soft spot for the Catholic Church because it was such a good experience.
You said the school's K through 8, so 8th grade is, I feel like by that point in a lot of kids' lives, you're starting to form. You're starting to really find your identity.
Yes.
And knowing what little I know about you from your book, like what kind of scenes were you...
Well, so I'll tell you a funny story. 2016-ish. No, 2015. A guy I went to Catholic school with organized an informal reunion for our class of 1981. So this is years later. And it was a Chinese place in the Sunset District. And it ended up, and he kind of contacted me, and I helped because I was kind of an organizing kind of person. So between us, we only got 11 people there, about a 51 class. That's not bad. And a number of them were old friends of mine who knew me, and I'd say, "Hey, you got to come to 26. Let's go. We'll have Chinese food. It'll be fun to see everybody." But some people I hadn't seen in years, and we're catching people up. And I'm telling one of the guys interrupts me and says, "Didn't you used to know everything about baseball?" And then my two friends who I'd brought, or a number of the friends who know me and stayed in touch over the years, kind of looked at me and says, "Oh yeah, he still does." So by the time I was in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, I was completely obsessed with baseball.
Okay.
It was my world entirely. My mother was a Yankees fan. My grandfather had been a Yankees fan, then briefly became a Dodgers fan because Jackie Robinson, a lot of people on the left in New York became Dodgers fans, and then back to being Yankees fans when they left. So we were raised as Yankees fans. And then the Candlestick Park, the Giants were the local team, and we became Giants fans too. So certainly by the mid-'70s, we were fans of both teams. When we became introduced to baseball around 76 to 8 as fans of both teams.
Okay.
But everyone was a Giants fan at school, and 1 or 2 A's fans. And then I was, one guy was from Houston, he was still an Astros fan, I was a Yankees fan. So it was, but I was completely obsessed with baseball. I played on the team. I wasn't a great player, but I was good enough. I played on the team. I went to as many games as I could. I read stacks of books. I collected baseball cards. I listened to the radio, listened to the games, but also the stupid talk shows about baseball. So that was a big part of my identity. I was raised in a very progressive political family. So I didn't always, and Stuart Hall was not, among the faculty it was, among the student body, it was not like a warm, welcoming place for people with kind of radical left-wing politics. This was the beginning of the kind of Reagan era, and, my family hated Reagan. And hating Reagan, even in this city then, made you a bit of a minority. So especially, and most of the anti-Reagan vote came from people of color. So if you're in a white community, it was really heavily pro-Reagan. So I think I was never somebody to keep my political views to myself. So I'm sure people had thought about it. They would have thought, "Oh, he was the weird left-wing guy." And now, of course, share the same idea. So it
even as
matter.
a kid, even as a youngster.
Yeah, I don't mean to put too fine a point on it, but I read a lot more than most people. I was always able to argue and present my views pretty compellingly and clearly in speaking or writing. So I was going to win the debate, and certainly if it was in front of a teacher, I was going to win it, So I wasn't afraid of that, but it wasn't like. And, I wasn't really into music in a meaningful way then. It was a fascinating time for music, but you're 12 years old, 13 years old, you're not going to go to the MAB. You're not going to, go to the Grateful Dead show.
Yeah.
It's just a little too young for that. And
what were you listening to at home?
My mother...
If anything.
At home, I think the first music that I really liked that I was listening to by then was things like the Beatles.
Yeah.
Simon and Garfunkel, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And my brother, who's no longer, he died in 2014, but he was not the older brother who was going to like introduce you to the cool music and the drugs and all that, right? He was the older brother. He would always go to ball games with me. We went to games a lot. He was very into baseball too, so we shared that. But he wasn't that older brother. Whereas I had friends who did have that older brother.
Yeah.
But I did not.
I did.
Right. So that's a great asset if that's right. I mean,
yeah. So you're saying baseball basically just
yeah.
Mostly as a fan.
I played on the team.
Yeah.
I played ball all the time in my, the sandlot.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is a term that was invented. It was first used here in San Francisco.
I've heard that before.
Because in the western part of the city, there was, you still feel it now when you play ball there. There's still sand on the ground.
Yeah.
So I played and here, of course, unlike New York, you can play year round. Yeah. So we would play catch in the street or running bases or, various versions of like 2-on-2 baseball games in the Presidio because I lived in Cal Hollow all the time. Mm-hmm. And on the weekends and even at night. And then, but. I still have friends who come over and they, old friends who come over while out in New York and they want to, can I look at your library? Because I have I'm collecting baseball. I actually have to go to Cooperstown next week for a conference and for a book event. And there's one bookstore in Cooperstown that has a fantastic, because all the people like me, so I'm going to go and buy a bunch of, so I've been reading and that's been a big part of my life, always, as long as, going back to way before 80, 81,
And were you a Niners fan at all?
Yes.
Okay.
My mother, I was being raised at this point by a single mom, was not from a cultural place where football was okay, right? It was kind of for the goyim. Mm-hmm. But everyone was interested in football. I certainly played a lot of touch football like everyone else did, and the Niners were the team. Now, they were terrible, right, some of those years. But of course, by 82, they won the Super Bowl. But in the late 70s, they were terrible. I remember O.J. Simpson was on the team, not when he was good. Right. So they'd win 2-3 games a year. So, but they were the team.
Yeah.
That was the team I rooted for and was very, in high school and in the 80s, they were an exciting team. And it was easy to be a 49ers fan. I don't claim to have as deep a connection, but I do claim that that's my team. And I'll certainly be rooting for them in the Super Bowl.
That was Lincoln Mitchell. Check back Thursday for part 2, when Lincoln will talk more about his writing and education, including the research he did on the city in the late 70s for his book, San Francisco Year Zero. Music for Storied San Francisco is by Otis McDonald. Film photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. The show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. You can find us online at storiedsf.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. And subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If that's Apple Podcasts or iTunes, please do us a favor and rate and review what we do. And if you have any feedback for us or you just want to say hi, our email is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.